If you were standing in the parking lot of a major warehouse club last Tuesday, you might have noticed a quiet, intentional shopper loading 20-pound bags of plain white rice into the back of an SUV, one after the other. There was no rushing, no talking, just a methodical process that looked like he had done this 100 times before. Most people walking by probably assumed he owned a restaurant or was hosting a massive family gathering. But the reality is far more calculated. Right now, wealthy individuals and experienced preppers are quietly hoarding this $3 grocery store staple, bypassing the expensive tactical gear and the $300 freeze-dried emergency meal kits. They are doing this because they understand a fundamental truth about the fragile economic landscape we are navigating today. This humble item, often ignored on the bottom shelf of the grain aisle, is the ultimate financial shield. It costs less than $1 a pound, packs over 1,600 calories per pound, and when stored correctly it can remain perfectly edible for up to 30 entire decades. Though realistically we are talking about a proven 30 years of shelf stability. We have been conditioned to believe that building a reliable emergency food supply requires spending hundreds or thousands of dollars on specialized commercial products. The marketing campaigns feed on our anxiety, pushing buckets of commercially packaged meals that the average American family simply cannot easily afford in today's economy. But researchers tracking supply chains and historical survival data tell a completely different story. The secret to long-term food security does not rely on massive budgets. It relies on understanding the raw biological value of basic agricultural staples. In the middle of an escalating silent food crisis where the cost of living feels like it is constantly slipping out of our control, this simple grain is becoming the most reliable inflation hedge you can put inside your home. Today we are going to unpack exactly why serious households are putting away 50 pounds of this specific staple, how it fundamentally alters the math of your grocery budget, and the precise methods required to guarantee it will still be feeding your family 30 years from now. Most of us picture a national food emergency as something dramatic. You can see coming on a weather radar or breaking news alert. But the reality is that a much more dangerous crisis is unfolding silently at the checkout line every single week. We are experiencing a slow erosion of household purchasing power where the cost of basic groceries has been quietly but relentlessly climbing, creating a structural shift in how American families feed themselves. By mid-2026, grocery prices have continued an upward trajectory for months on end, squeezing household budgets tighter than they have been in recent memory. Let us look at the meat counter, for example. The price of beef, specifically ground beef, has skyrocketed between 16 and nearly 22%. This is not a temporary blip caused by a seasonal disruption. It is the direct result of the United States cattle herd shrinking to its smallest size since 1951. When the fundamental supply of animal protein drops that drastically, the cost of feeding a family inevitably surges to levels that are simply unsustainable for the average paycheck. Overall, food-at-home prices are rising faster than they have in over 2 decades, creating a heavy accumulating financial pressure on households across the nation. The Consumer Price Index for food has shown persistent inflation, and as a result, the national rate of food insecurity has ticked upward. This pressure is hitting vulnerable populations especially hard, with some assistance groups seeing insecurity rates jump to an alarming 46%. This macroeconomic pressure translates directly into real everyday anxiety for the middle class. Right now, 8 out of 10 Americans report they are actively trying to spend less money at the grocery store. They are not just planning to do it eventually. They are doing it week after week by switching to cheaper generic brands, taking long-loved items off the grocery list entirely, and strictly clipping coupons just to keep the final total from climbing completely out of reach. This is not a pessimistic forecast of what might happen in the future. This is the harsh economic reality that is already happening right now in every city and town across the country. This is exactly the kind of unforgiving economic environment where the food we are focusing on becomes exponentially more valuable. When the cost of meat and fresh produce puts a severe strain on your wallet, finding an affordable, calorie-dense alternative is no longer just a niche hobby for serious preppers. It becomes a mandatory economic survival strategy for everyday urban and suburban residents. Consider the sheer caloric mathematics of this humble grain. One single pound of dry white rice holds roughly 1,600 to 1,700 calories, which is practically a full day of baseline energy for an average adult. You are getting that massive amount of life-sustaining energy in a single pound of grain that costs less than $1. If you compare that to a pound of potato chips or a pound of fresh vegetables, which provide only a fraction of those calories and spoil in a matter of days, the financial and nutritional superiority of rice becomes undeniable. Pound for pound and dollar for dollar, white rice is one of the most calorie-dense, affordable foods that exists anywhere on the planet. And this is not some new trendy discovery manufactured by clever marketing campaigns or internet influencers. Rice has reliably sustained entire human populations through centuries of grueling wars, catastrophic famines, and total collapses of regional supply chains. It became the daily caloric foundation for massive parts of the world precisely because it stores easily without any need for electrical refrigeration. It is produced in staggering volumes, and it delivers steady, reliable energy at a price point that almost anyone can afford. Every time history records a major disruption, whether it is wartime rationing or extended supply failures, rice has always been the grain that lasted the longest and fed the most people when everything else ran out. There is a profound psychological barrier we have to overcome when we talk about this grain because most people have spent their entire lives absorbing the flawed idea that a cheap price tag equals low value. We are conditioned to think that if something costs almost nothing and is available on every corner, it cannot possibly be that important or effective for survival. White rice shatters that assumption completely. It is highly affordable because it grows abundantly and processes simply, not because it lacks nutritional or survival importance. Understanding that distinction is actually the dividing line that separates people who are genuinely prepared for the future from those who are merely hoping for the best. While the sheer caloric density of white rice makes it an unparalleled foundation for any emergency food supply, relying on it entirely presents a silent vulnerability that catches many well-intentioned families off guard. White rice is almost entirely carbohydrate, which is exactly what makes it such an efficient emergency calorie source, but it is genuinely low in protein and fat. Over an extended period of time, living on rice alone creates nutritional deficiencies that compound quickly. You could follow every single storage step perfectly carefully, tucking away buckets of grain, and still find your family struggling if you ignore the baseline biological requirements of the human body. Your body demands a continuous supply of building blocks to synthesize protein, which is necessary to maintain muscle mass, support a healthy immune system, and keep core physiological functions running smoothly. These building blocks are called amino acids, and there are 9 essential ones that your body simply cannot produce on its own. They must be extracted directly from the food you consume every single day. In normal, prosperous times, most Americans acquire these 9 essential amino acids easily by eating animal proteins like beef, poultry, pork, or eggs. But as we just discussed, the economic reality of shrinking cattle herds and soaring grocery store prices is making that daily animal protein increasingly difficult for the average family to comfortably afford. When a severe supply chain disruption hits, or when persistent inflation simply prices meat completely off your dinner table, you need a realistic backup plan that delivers the exact same nutritional profile without the massive, prohibitive cost. This is where the hard science of plant-based protein becomes a critical, non-negotiable survival tool rather than just a casual dietary preference. If we look closely at the biochemical structure of our staple grains, we find a fascinating natural balance. Grains like white rice contain a rich, abundant amount of sulfur-containing amino acids, specifically methionine and cysteine, but they severely lack another critical amino acid called lysine. On the flip side of this equation, common legumes like dried pinto beans, black beans, or lentils are incredibly rich in lysine but happen to be limited in their methionine content. When you consume white rice and dried beans together, or even just within the same 24-hour period, a remarkable biochemical synergy takes place inside your digestive system. These 2 incredibly cheap basic foods perfectly compensate for each other's nutritional blind spots. They interlock seamlessly to form what nutritionists call a complete protein. This plant-based combination possesses a biological value that is entirely equivalent to the protein you would get from a premium piece of steak or a chicken breast. The solution people in preparedness communities have relied on for generations is incredibly simple and highly effective pairing that rice with dried beans or lentils. In scenarios involving prolonged supply chain disruptions or severe economic crises that put meat beyond your family's reach, this rice and bean combination provides absolute nutritional security at a microscopic fraction of the cost. You are effectively replacing a $20 per pound luxury with a 50-cent per pound guarantee. This is exactly why experienced preppers do not just buy 50 pounds of rice in isolation. They deliberately buy the corresponding beans to complete the biological puzzle. They understand that they are not just storing basic calories. They are strategically storing complete, life-sustaining nutrition that protects their family's health when grocery store shelves go bare. The beauty of this nutritional partnership extends far beyond the human body and right into your designated storage closet. Beyond the immense nutritional benefit, dried beans and lentils store almost exactly the same way as white rice. You do not need to learn a completely new preservation system, read different manuals, or buy entirely different specialty equipment to keep them safe from the elements. They utilize the exact same heavy-duty mylar bags, the same chemical oxygen absorbers, the same rigid bucket methods, and they achieve the exact same impressive decades-long shelf life range. They are not a complicated addition to your overall preparedness plan. They are the natural complement that closes the critical gap rice alone cannot close. By simply adding a bag of dried beans next to your bag of white rice at checkout, you instantly upgrade your stockpile from a basic survival ration into a comprehensive, nutritionally complete dietary foundation. When you finally head to the grocery store with the intention of building this vital nutritional foundation, you are going to face a critical decision right there in the grain aisle. It is a decision that seems like a simple matter of personal dietary preference, but it is actually the single most consequential mistake people make in long-term food storage. You walk down the aisle with the absolute best of intentions, wanting to do this properly for your family, and your hand instinctively reaches for the brown rice. It feels like the smarter, healthier option because we are constantly told that less processed, whole grains are better for our daily diets. It possesses a richer nutritional profile in the short term, so it feels like the obvious, responsible choice for someone who is thinking carefully about their family's well-being. But that one well-intentioned decision is the most common and most expensive catastrophe in the entire preparedness community. To understand why this is so dangerous, we have to look closely at the physical structure of the grain itself. Brown rice still retains its natural outer bran layer and the internal seed germ, and those specific components hold a very high concentration of natural oils and unsaturated fatty acids. While those oils provide excellent short-term nutrition, they are incredibly unstable chemically over long periods of time. When these natural fats are exposed to even trace amounts of oxygen or normal room temperatures, a process called autooxidation begins to occur. The double bonds in the fatty acids break down and oxidize, creating new chemical compounds known as aldehydes and ketones. In plain English, those oils turn rancid, and this destructive process typically starts within just 6 to 12 months of storage, sometimes even sooner if the storage area gets too warm during the summer months. What makes this chemical breakdown genuinely devastating is that it happens completely invisibly. Rice that has gone totally rancid from oxidized oils can still look completely fine from the outside. It maintains the exact same color, the exact same texture, and shows absolutely no visible sign that anything is wrong inside the container. Think about what that means in practice. Someone spends 2.5 years painstakingly building what they believe is a serious, robust food reserve for their family. They invest in the heavy-duty containers, they carefully study storage guides, and they dedicate an entire section of their home to this project. Then one evening, perhaps during a routine check or an actual crisis, they open a container and the foul smell hits them before they even get the lid all the way off. The rice has turned, and in a real emergency when supply chains are frozen and grocery stores are empty, that is not a mistake you can simply undo. The entire supply is just gone. This is precisely where standard white rice proves its unmatched superiority. The industrial milling process used to create white rice intentionally strips away that outer bran layer and the germ completely, which entirely removes those unstable oil-heavy components. What is left behind is a highly purified, stable starch matrix that is almost completely immune to auto-oxidation. That single manufacturing difference is the exact reason why white rice can easily last for 25 to 30 years in proper storage, while brown rice simply cannot reliably make it past a year and a half, even under the absolute most ideal conditions. But even within the category of white rice, there is another subtle distinction that most first-time buyers completely miss. When you're standing in front of those massive 20-pound bags, you want to specifically look for long-grain white rice. Standard long-grain white rice naturally contains a lower moisture content than short-grain or medium-grain varieties. That lower internal moisture means it remains far more chemically stable when sealed away for decades. While varieties like jasmine and basmati are technically white rice and will store just fine since their bran has been removed, they usually carry a much higher price tag per pound. Experienced households stick to the standard long-grain white rice for one incredibly practical reason: it delivers the absolute best calorie-to-dollar ratio of anything in the entire supermarket. If you are listening to this and realizing your current emergency pantry is built on a foundation of brown rice, do not panic. Simply adjust your strategy today. Treat that brown rice as a short-term rotation item and make a plan to incorporate it into your regular family meals over the next 12 months. Do not rely on it as your long-term insurance policy. The unshakable foundation of any food reserve meant to last through decades of uncertainty absolutely has to be white grain. Once you have the correct, highly stable grain in your shopping cart, the next crucial step is ensuring the environment you put it in is perfectly engineered to freeze time, which requires completely eliminating the invisible enemies that destroy stored food. You could buy all the 50-pound bags of $3 rice in the entire county, but if you rely on the packaging it came in, you are essentially guaranteeing your family will open a container of ruined grain when a crisis finally hits. Most people assume that once their food is sealed inside a heavy-duty plastic storage tub, it is completely protected from the outside world. That assumption alone is behind a massive number of failed food supplies across the preparedness community. There are silent threats that destroy stored grain without giving you any warning, working invisibly and completely until the damage is irreversible. The very first threat you have to neutralize actually arrives inside the grain itself. Grain naturally harbors microscopic eggs of tiny reddish-brown beetles known as weevils. These eggs are completely invisible to the naked eye, meaning there is absolutely no way to know they are present when you pull the bag off the grocery store shelf. If you place that untreated grain into a warm storage closet, those eggs will inevitably hatch over time, turning your pristine caloric reserve into something you would never want to feed your family. The solution requires no chemicals and costs absolutely nothing. You simply place the newly purchased bags of rice into a standard household freezer at 0 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 to 4 days. This crucial first step entirely eliminates pests at every stage of development, from eggs to larvae to adults. Once the grain is clean, you have to address the slow, silent destroyer of all long-term food storage, which is oxygen. Many well-meaning individuals try to solve this by using standard countertop vacuum sealers. While a vacuum-sealed bag looks incredibly protected as the plastic shrinks tight and the air visibly disappears, standard plastic still contains microscopic pores. Over a span of 10 or 20 years, those microscopic pores allow small amounts of air and moisture to slowly pass through the material, which is the exact mechanism that will quietly end your supply before you ever open the lid. To achieve a true 30-year shelf life, industrial preppers abandon standard plastic and utilize a specialized material called mylar. Mylar is a flexible laminate engineered specifically for long-term food preservation, constructed from layers of oriented polyester, metallized aluminum, and food-safe polyethylene. This heavy-duty metallic material creates a barrier at the molecular level, possessing an oxygen and water vapor transmission rate that is practically zero, while completely blocking out ultraviolet radiation. However, sealing the food inside a mylar bag only traps the existing atmospheric air inside with the grain. To completely eradicate that leftover air, you must introduce a chemical oxygen absorber into the bag right before applying heat to seal it. These small packets contain iron powder, moisture-retaining clay, and salt. Once sealed inside, the iron undergoes a rapid oxidation process, essentially rusting, which consumes the free oxygen molecules trapped in the bag. This chemical reaction pulls the internal oxygen concentration down below 0.1%, leaving behind an incredibly stable inert nitrogen environment. This oxygen-free space completely halts the oxidation of fats, prevents any aerobic bacteria or mold from growing, and ensures that any hypothetical surviving insect eggs are entirely suffocated. A vital technical tip for execution is that you must completely seal the Mylar bag with a heat sealer within 10 minutes of opening your package of oxygen absorbers. Otherwise, they will waste their reactive capacity on the open air of your kitchen. It is also highly recommended to pack your grain into smaller 1-gallon Mylar bags rather than a single massive 5-gallon bag. This strategic division protects the majority of your supply from being re-exposed to moisture and oxygen when you finally need to open a bag to consume it. The final step in this preservation system addresses the structural weakness of the Mylar bag itself. While Mylar is perfect at stopping gas and light, it is a soft material that is easily punctured by the teeth of common urban rodents like mice and squirrels. This makes a dual-layer protection structure completely mandatory for household security. Once your smaller Mylar bags are frozen-filled, treated with oxygen absorbers, and heat-sealed, they must be placed inside rigid 5-gallon high-density polyethylene plastic buckets with tight-fitting lids. This tough outer plastic shell provides the necessary mechanical strength to resist rodent attacks and allows you to efficiently stack your food supply in tight apartment closets. Finally, remember that temperature swings will defeat the best packaging on Earth. A perfectly sealed bucket stored in a garage that swings from freezing winter temperatures to over 100 degrees in July will degrade rapidly. You must keep this specialized dual-layer system in a cool, dark, and dry interior space, ideally maintaining a stable temperature below 70 degrees Fahrenheit to guarantee that your $3 investment will truly outlast the next 3 decades of economic uncertainty. When you move past the scientific mechanisms of oxygen absorbers and the technical requirements of high-density plastic, you inevitably arrive at the most compelling aspect of this entire preparedness strategy, which is the sheer financial efficiency of building your stockpile. We need to talk about the actual math of acquiring 50 pounds of this life-sustaining grain, because it entirely redefines what it means to be a prepared household in today's economy. If you purchase white rice in bulk from a warehouse club, a large chain grocery store, or the bulk grain section at an Asian grocery market, which often has the absolute lowest per-pound pricing you will find anywhere, it typically runs between 50 cents and $1 per pound. At that price point, a full 50-pound supply comes together for under $50 total. I want you to sit with that number for a second. Under $50. In our current economic reality, that is the equivalent of one single dinner out for 2 people at a mid-range restaurant, a few rounds of casual weekend takeout, or just 2 or 3 tanks of gas, depending on what part of the country you live in. For the exact same amount of money you might mindlessly spend on one completely forgettable evening, you can build a rock-solid foundation of household food security that strictly holds its nutritional value and stays perfectly edible for longer than most 30-year home mortgages run. You might be wondering why the preparedness community constantly fixates on that specific number of 50 pounds per person. It sounds like a piece of internet folklore or a suspiciously round number invented for YouTube. But when you trace it back to its origins, it stops sounding random and starts sounding incredibly obvious. University extension programs, the exact same academic programs used by agricultural and nutrition scientists to help everyday American families build realistic, scientifically sound food reserves, officially recommend storing between 25 and 60 pounds of rice per person as a reliable 1-year calorie buffer. 50 pounds sits perfectly right in the middle of that scientifically documented window. Translating that 50-pound academic recommendation into the physical reality of your home is much easier than most people imagine. A standard 5-gallon food-grade plastic bucket holds roughly 30 to 35 pounds of dry rice when properly packed. That one single bucket sitting quietly in the back corner of a hallway closet can provide about 25 days of baseline survival calories for one adult. If you stack 2 buckets on top of each other, you have instantly secured close to 50 days of sustaining food from rice alone, and it takes up less floor space in your home than a standard laundry basket. For 2 adults living in a house or an apartment, 4 buckets gets you a solid, dependable buffer against supply chain shocks. For a family of 4, 8 buckets builds a genuine year-long foundation. That number of buckets might sound slightly intimidating at first until you realize how most people who actually have this security built it in the first place. You do not achieve this in one massive expensive purchase, and you do not do it in one exhausting trip to the store. The smartest households build their reserve by simply adding 1 extra bag to the grocery cart every few weeks. They get 1 single bucket filled, treated, and sealed each month. Over time, the supply quietly builds in the background without any single purchase ever feeling like a stressful financial hit to the monthly budget. This incremental low-stress approach is exactly why people who truly understand long-term food storage are rarely impressed by those incredibly expensive freeze-dried survival kits sold online. A few properly filled buckets built for a fraction of the cost can completely outperform nearly any premium commercial kit at many times the price over the exact same storage window. The mathematical advantage is simply not even close. Furthermore, the timing for making this specific financial move is genuinely not neutral. As we covered earlier, meat prices are soaring, fresh produce keeps climbing, and the overall cost of food at home is rising faster than its own 20-year average. But while all of that inflation is crushing the American consumer, the global rice supply is actually sitting near record highs. Total worldwide output crossed 550 million metric tons during the 2025 to 2026 growing season, with India alone supplying close to 40% of all global rice exports. Because of these massive stockpiles and record harvests, industry analysts expect rice prices to remain relatively low and stable through the rest of the year. The gap between what this vital survival staple costs and what everything else in the grocery store costs is wider right now than it has been in a very long time. This is not just a casual observation to file away for later. This is a highly specific, temporary financial window to secure your family's future, and as with all economic windows, it will not stay open forever. Here is one honest reality check I want to offer before we wrap up today. Many people who consume this kind of information will follow the logic completely, agree with all the financial math, and then fail to take any action. This usually happens not because they cannot afford a basic bag of rice, but because there is always a more comfortable moment just around the corner. We tell ourselves we will wait for a less busy week or a time when the world feels a little less pressing. But the households that are genuinely prepared for the next decade of economic shifts are not the ones who waited for the perfect timing. They are the ones who simply put 1 5-pound bag in their grocery cart on an ordinary Tuesday and kept going steadily from there. Your preparedness plan does not have to be fully formed before you start. It can begin with a single bag of white rice that goes into your freezer for 4 days and then into a sealed container. That is a real beginning, and a real beginning is the only thing standing between where you are right now and where you actually want your family to be. Take 10 minutes tonight to check what you currently have stored. If your reserve is built on brown rice, start rotating it through your regular meals over the next 12 months and replace it with white rice for anything meant to be a long-term reserve. If you have nothing stored at all, start with 1 5-gallon bucket and build your foundation from there. Just 1 bag at a time. Remember to freeze every new bag before you seal it. Use proper Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers instead of relying on a standard vacuum sealer alone. And grab a bag of dried beans on that exact same shopping trip so you are closing the nutritional gap from day one. You do not need to solve the entire supply chain crisis today. You just need to start, because 50 pounds of properly stored white rice in a closet is more realistic, more affordable, and more doable than most people assume once they actually sit down with the numbers. The window for securing this baseline food security at these prices will not stay open forever. Make the choice to take that first step on your very next trip to the grocery